In the days when Umar was Caliph, he was presented with a problem which he found very difficult to solve. After considerable thought, he summoned his friend and colleague Sa'id bin Amir to his side. "Sa'id," said Umar, "I just don't know what to do. The people of Homs have come to me for the 5th time complaining about their governor. I have tried to accommodate them by appointing men whom I thought were suitable, but apparently each one turned out to be a disappointment in one way or another. There just isn't anyone left to whom I can entrust such a position, except," he added, "for one who happens to be facing me at this moment. And so," continued Omar with a smile, "I hereby appoint you governor of Homs." Sa'id was completely taken aback. He knew the people of Homs were difficult to accommodate. Sa'id felt he was in no way qualified to govern anyone, let alone the people of Homs. He shook his head unhappily. "Omar," he said, "by Allah, I plead with you not to place such a trial before me. I could never undertake such a position." "What?" exclaimed Umar, suddenly losing his temper. "You helped saddle me with the responsibility of the Caliphate, and now you won't help me carry out that responsibility? I won't stand for it, Sa'id. You will just have to accept this appointment, whether you want to or not. This is an order I am giving you." Sa'id had no other option but to obey Umar. After he had settled his affairs in Medina, he reluctantly came to say goodbye to Umar. "Now, brother," said Umar, appeased, "don't look so distressed. I am convinced that with Allah's help you will be able to handle the job perfectly well. Now, one last matter. Let us decide on your salary." Sa'id looked surprised. "What do I need with a salary? What I receive from the treasury is more than enough." Umar laughed. "Allah will be with you, Sa'id," he said, and to show that he was well pleased, embraced him and sent him on his way. Off went Sa'id to Homs, and for some time Umar heard nothing from that part of the world. Umar was relieved. "Things must finally be going smoothly," he said to himself. "I was right in appointing Sa'id." One day a delegation from the people of Homs turned up at Umar's house, as was customary several times a year. Umar asked them for news of their district, and they replied to Umar's satisfaction. Finally, Umar asked to be shown a list of the poor and destitute, that they could be given funds from the general treasury. The list was given to Umar, who checked it over and frowned. "Who is this Sa'id bin Amir? Can there be two such people with the same name?" he asked. "Certainly not," replied the delegate. "That is Sa'id bin Amir, our governor." "What? You write his name down here as if he were a pauper?" "But he is a pauper, respected brother," replied the other with arms outstretched. "He is the poorest amongst us. Days pass when you will not smell cooking from his stove, I warrant you." Omar dropped his head, and when he raised it again, the visitor noticed his beard was damp with tears. "We shall take care of this," said Omar softly, and asked the delegation to retire. When the delegation headed home the next day, they were carrying 1,000 sovereigns from the Caliph Umar to be given to Sa'id bin Amir, governor of Homs. Once back at Homs, the delegation proudly presented the gift to Sa'id in a sheepskin purse. Sa'id thanked them warmly, but when they had left and he discovered what the purse contained, his face paled, and he dropped the purse as if it was a curse. "From God we come, and to God we return," he murmured, as one does when faced with death. His wife, overhearing him, was shocked. "Oh, what has happened?" she exclaimed. "Who is dead? Did the Amirul Mu'minin die?" "Worse than that," answered Sa'id. Worse than that? What could be worse, dear husband? What would you say if something came to lure me away from the everlasting life? What would you say if corruption entered our house? Why, get rid of it, cried his wife. Flee from it. And will you help me do it? Asked Said of his wife. With pleasure, husband, she replied. So by the end of the day, the 1,000 sovereigns which Umar had given Said were distributed amongst the poor of the regions of Homs. It wasn't long after that that Umar, who was making his regular visit around the provinces, stopped at Homs. As soon as he arrived, the inhabitants gathered around and began complaining again about their governor. Umar was astounded and dismayed. "How do you expect me to believe you this time?" he scolded. "5 times in succession I have replaced a governor in Homs, and recently I have sent you the best man I have, a faithful and true servant of Islam, and still you dare to complain. This time I insist that Said bin Amir be present in person to defend himself against your charges, and you will soon see, ungrateful lot that you are, how mistaken you must be." With this said, Umar marched off to his quarters, but in his heart he wondered secretly how Said could have displeased these people, and he prayed to Allah that his good opinion and faith in Said be not shaken. The next morning, everyone, including Said the governor, assembled at Umar's quarters. "Now," announced Umar in a loud voice, "may the first man who wishes to voice a complaint against your governor come forward." From out of the crowd stepped a young man, robust and strong, who was evidently not afraid to speak his opinion before the Caliph. "O leader of the faithful," he began, "the fact is that our governor is lazy. He does not come out of his house until late in the morning." "Not only that," interrupted another standing in the crowd, "but on some days we don't even see him until evening. Who knows what he does all day long in his house?" Umar winced at these accusations and turned to Said and asked, "What is your explanation for this conduct?" Said shook his head. "Allah is witness that what I am about to confess is both distasteful and embarrassing to me. The fact is that I have no servant to help me, so early in the morning I knead the dough, and then I bake bread. Following that I perform my ablutions, then I come to meet the people. But since I only have one change of clothes, sometimes I am also obliged to wash them and wait for them to dry. Sometimes I have to mend them before venturing out of my house." Now no one suspected that Said had no servant. In those days everyone of importance had a servant, and certainly a governor would have more than one. This fact shed a different light on the accusations, and Umar's faith in his friend was restored. "Any more complaints?" called out Umar. "Yes, I have one," grumbled an old man. "We older citizens like to gather in the evenings and talk about the past, but Said here is unfriendly and never wants to join us." Umar turned again to Said for an explanation. "Well, the fact is that I would rather keep vigil at night and worship Allah than to talk idly of past glories," confessed Said. Umar smiled broadly at Said and called again to the crowd. "Are there any more complaints against this man who is your governor?" "Well, yes, there is," cried a merchant. "When he does join us, he quite often seems to be thinking of other things, and once he even fainted before our very eyes for no particular reason." At these words Said's face turned dark, and he bowed his head for a moment. Umar waited for his friend to speak, Finally, Said began to explain in a low voice, "I have not always been a Muslim, as you know. There was a time when I was an idolater, and that period of my life is always horrible for me to remember. The time I passed out, I was remembering when Khubayb bin Adi was being tortured to death. I was there, and I watched as they cut his body into pieces, and he not dead yet." Here Said shielded his eyes with his hands and began to sob. "I did nothing to stop them. I just stood there. And then when they asked him if he would prefer Muhammad to be in his place, he replied, 'Never. 1,000 times will I accept death rather than allow even a thorn to prick Muhammad's side.' Ah, when I remember that, I did not lift a finger to help this saintly man. My self-disgust overwhelms me, and I feel as if God will never forgive me." A long silence followed this confession. Umar, touched by the story and proud of his friend, exclaimed, "Praise be to God! Said is indeed a true servant of God, and my faith in him is justified." Umar then sent another 1,000 sovereigns to Said in order to ease his situation. When his wife saw the money, she was delighted. "Praise be to God," she exclaimed. "Now we will be able to hire a servant to help us with the housework and have something left over for ourselves." "Dear wife," said Said, stroking his wife's head gently, "shall I tell you what would be even better than that?" "What could be better than that?" asked his wife. "We shall give it to someone who will give it back at a time when we might be in even greater need than now." "And how will that be?" asked the wife. "We shall give it as a loan to Allah," said Said, "for if we do so, then you may be sure it will return to us many times over." His wife agreed, and in no time at all the whole amount had again been distributed to the poor of the humps. Such were the natures of the men who ruled over the Islamic countries in the early days.